In the 1800s, the richest city in America wasn't New York. It wasn't Boston. It was a tiny island at the very bottom of Florida, a speck of coral so littered with the bones of the dead that its old name meant Bone Island. We know it today as Key West. And the fortunes made here didn't come from gold mines or factories. They came from something almost unbelievable: shipwrecks. So, what if you arrived on that island as a young man with nothing but nerve and clawed your way to a fortune? 90 miles from Havana, at the edge of the sea, in a city where a single storm could hand you everything or take it all back. This is what it was actually like to live rich in 1800s Key West. So take a breath. Let's live it together. Open your eyes. A warm sea breeze is already moving through the tall shuttered windows, stirring the mosquito netting over the bed. Somewhere below, a servant is grinding coffee, and out the window, the harbor is full of masts, the water impossibly blue, and the smell of salt and jasmine and cigar smoke drifts up on the air. By now, I live in a grand house on the island, a conch mansion, folks call it, built by ship's carpenters who knew boats better than buildings. It has wide, cool verandas wrapping all the way around, tall ceilings, gingerbread trim carved fine as lace, and a widow's walk up on the roof where a man can stand and watch the sea for ships. Every window and door is placed to catch the breeze, because out here, the breeze is everything. There's no true winter, no snow a person could imagine, just endless summer, tempered by the trade winds and broken by afternoon storms. But I didn't start here. I came to Key West a young man in my 20s with empty pockets and a strong back, and I earned every board of this place. Let me show you how. I sleep late, if I please. I have servants to cook and clean and tend the garden of orchids and lime trees. And when I rise, I take my coffee, strong, dark Cuban coffee, out on the veranda and look down over a town that shouldn't exist at all. A rich little city on a speck of coral, 90 miles from Cuba, hundreds of miles from anywhere else, thriving in the middle of the sea. Now let me tell you where the money comes from, because you won't believe the first of it. Just off our shores runs the Great Florida Reef, a wall of coral hidden just beneath the waves, stretching for miles. And in the days before the lighthouses, ships wrecked on that reef constantly. Merchant vessels loaded with cargo, bound for New Orleans or New York or Havana, would strike the coral in a storm or a dark night and founder right there inside of the island. And when that happened, a cry would go up across the town, "Wreck ashore!" And every able man would drop what he was doing and race for the boats. As a young man, that cry was my whole life. I crewed those wrecking schooners, learned the reef, and took my share of the danger and the reward. Because here, salvaging wrecks was a licensed, legal, respectable business, and it made men rich. We were the wreckers. The first captain to reach the stricken ship became wreckmaster, and we'd save the crew first, always the crew first, and then the cargo. Bales of cotton, barrels of wine, crates of furniture, silk, china, tools, whatever the sea was trying to swallow, we hauled it off and brought it back to Key West. Then it all went before the wrecking court and the auction house, and the wreckers were awarded a handsome share of the value for the risk we took. A single good wreck could make a man's whole year. It sounds like plunder, but it was law, licensed and judged, and it built this entire city. For a stretch there in the middle of the century, this little island had more millionaires per person than any city in America, and more wealth flowed across the Key West docks from salvaged wrecks than anyone on the mainland could dream of. One ship alone, wrecked on the reef in 1856, gave up one of the richest hauls anyone ever saw. Here's the charm of it, and the strangeness. Walk into my fine house, and half of what furnishes it once belonged to a ship that never reached its port. The mahogany dining table, the gilt mirror, the crystal, the china, the very wine in my cellar, and the silk on the parlor chairs. So much of the luxury in Key West arrived not from a store, but off the reef, saved from a sinking ship and bought at auction. It's a running joke on the island that you can furnish a mansion entirely from other people's misfortunes. A rich Key West home in these years is a kind of museum of the sea's disasters. Beautiful things pulled from the water and given a second life in a house on a coral island. I'll admit there's something uneasy in it when you sit with it. Our comfort is stitched together from other men's ruin. But the sea gives and the sea takes, and every soul on this island lives by that bargain. The reef made the first fortune, but a wise man doesn't lean on shipwrecks forever. And so, like many, I put my money into cigars. When a long war for Cuban independence breaks out at the end of the 1860s, thousands cross that 90 miles of water and land here, and the island fills with cigar factories. Soon, Key West is rolling cigars by the millions, over 100 million a year at its height, and they call it the cigar capital of the world. Walk into one of my factories, and you'll see rows of skilled workers at their benches, rolling the tobacco leaf by hand with astonishing speed. And up on a little raised platform sits a man called the lector, the reader, who reads aloud all day from newspapers and novels, so the workers' minds have something to feed on while their hands fly. It's a beautiful thing to see, a whole room full of people being read to as they work. The cigars make me richer than the wrecks ever did, and steadier. And they tie this little American island tighter to Cuba than to any part of the United States. Our music, our food, our coffee, half our talk is Cuban. In Key West, Havana feels closer than Miami, because it is. And there's more the sea gives, if you know how to take it. There are the sponges. In the shallow, clear waters around the Keys grow some of the finest natural sponges in the world, and Key West becomes the sponge capital of America. Whole fleets of little boats go out, and men hook the sponges off the bottom through glass-bottomed buckets, and the sponge market on the docks is a roaring, smelly, money-making business. I have a share in that, too. There are turtles, caught and kept alive in pens called crawls, sold for their meat and shell. Turtle soup is a delicacy in every fine house, including mine. There is fishing and salt, raked from shallow tidal ponds and dried in the sun, a booming trade until a hurricane in 1876 finally destroys it for good. And there is trade, ships coming and going to Havana and Nassau and New Orleans and New York, and a merchant with a good head can take his cut of all of it. That's the secret of a Key West fortune in these years. You don't put all your money in one thing. You spread it. A little wrecking, a lot of cigars, a share in sponges, a hand in shipping and land. The sea is generous to those who court her from many directions at once. So how does a rich man eat and live out here at the edge of the map? Very well indeed. My table groans with the bounty of the sea and the tropics. Fresh fish and lobster and shrimp pulled from the water that morning. Green turtle soup, conch chowder, sweet key lime squeezed over everything, and one day someone will fold them into a pie the whole world will know. There are mangoes and sapodillas and coconuts from my own garden, strong Cuban coffee, and wine and delicacies shipped in, or salvaged in, from across the sea. I dress for the heat, but I dress well. A crisp white linen suit, light as air, a fine Panama hat, good leather shoes. On this island, a gentleman learns to look immaculate while the sun tries to melt him. In the evenings, there are balls and dinners and the society of the other merchant families. And there is the San Carlos, the great Cuban cultural hall, with its music and theater and lectures. There is horse racing and sailing for pleasure, and cockfights, and the endless pleasure of a good cigar and a glass of rum on a veranda while the sun goes down over the water. It is, I'll be honest with you, a very sweet life. But I'd be lying to you if I let you think this whole island lived as I do. It didn't, and the truth deserves telling. My fine life rested on a great deal of labor that wasn't mine. In these years, there were enslaved people in Key West, bought and sold like the cargo off the wrecks, and their unpaid work helped build the comfort of men like me. There were free black Bahamians and African Americans doing the hardest, hottest, most dangerous work on the docks and the sponge boats. There were Cuban cigar workers whose swift hands made my fortune while they lived in modest little wooden cottages, and who would one day organize and strike for a fairer share of what they made. There were sailors and spongers and fishermen who risked their lives on the water for a fraction of what the merchants earned. Key West was one of the most mixed, most cosmopolitan places in all of America. Bahamian conchs, Cubans, Americans north and south, black and white, speaking a dozen tongues on one small island. It was, in its way, wonderful. But the wealth I enjoyed was never shared evenly, and I'd be a poor storyteller to pretend it was. For all the money in the world, there are two things on this island that no fortune can buy its way out of, and they keep every rich man humble. The first is the hurricane. Out here, in the late summer, the sky can turn a sickly green, and the sea can rise up and simply erase things. A great storm, like the terrible hurricane that batters us in 1846, can sink the wrecking fleet, flatten the cigar factories, tear the roof off a mansion, and wipe out a fortune that took 20 years to build, all in a single terrible night. Every soul on Key West lives with one eye on the weather. The second is fever. Yellow fever comes to this island like a curse, and it does not care how rich you are. It sweeps through the crowded town in the hot months and takes the merchant in his mansion as readily as the sailor in his shack. And on an April night in 1886, a great fire breaks loose next to the San Carlos Hall and races through the wooden heart of the city, burning 18 cigar factories and hundreds of homes to ash before it's done. So I hold my wealth with an open hand, because I've seen how fast the sea and the sky and the flame can take it. On this island, a man is never more than one bad season from ruin, and everyone, rich or poor, knows it. You have to understand how strange and isolated this place is. There is no railroad here. None will reach this island until long after my time. There are no roads to the mainland at all. The only way in or out is by boat. And yet, Key West is not a backwater. It's one of the busiest, most connected ports in the South because it sits right on the sea lanes between the Atlantic and the Gulf. Ships from everywhere put in here. I can take a steamer to Havana in a day and be back with cigars and coffee and news. New Orleans, Nassau, New York, all of them feel closer by water than the wild, empty Florida mainland does by land. Even the Great War doesn't break us the way you'd expect. When Florida leaves the Union, Key West somehow stays under Union control the whole time. The fort out on the point never falls, and the island becomes a Union Navy base right in the middle of the Confederacy. It's a peculiar thing, this southernmost town flying the northern flag. But that's Key West all over. A place that never quite belonged to anyone but itself and the sea. Now and again I hear a wild rumor that someday a man might try to run a railroad clear across the open water to reach us. I laugh at it. Who could ever build such a thing? They will, but not for many years, and not in my lifetime. Now I'm an old man, well into my 60s, and I've watched this island make me rich in 3 different ways over a long life. But I've lived long enough now to feel the tide turning against all of them. The wrecking that made me as a young man is nearly gone. One by one, over the years, they built lighthouses along the reef, tall iron towers with great lamps, and as the ships stopped wrecking, the wreckers' fortunes dried up. The very thing that built this city is being engineered out of existence, and I'm glad of it for the sailors' sake, even as I feel it in my purse. A city built on shipwrecks cannot last once the ships stop wrecking. The cigars, too, will not stay forever. Fire and labor troubles trouble the trade, and other towns on the mainland begin luring the factories away with promises of land and rail. I can see the day coming when the great cigar houses pack up and move north, and much of the island's bustle goes with them. I've made my fortune in the golden years, the wrecking boom, the cigar boom, the sponge trade, all at their height. But I understand, watching from my veranda, that these booms are like the island itself, beautiful, rich, and never quite permanent. The sea gives, and in time, the sea moves on. So that's my life, a rich man's life on Key West. A life of coffee on the veranda and cargo off the reef, of cigars rolled by the million and sponges hauled from the sea, of white linen suits and turtle soup and the endless blue water on every side. A life lived on a speck of coral at the bottom of America, in a city that was, for one glittering stretch, the richest in the whole country. It was sweet. I won't pretend it wasn't, but it was never solid ground. It was an island, built on shipwrecks and cigars and the labor of a great many people who never shared in its riches, and always just one hurricane away from starting over. I made my fortune from the sea, and I never once forgot that the sea could take it all back. And if you'd lived it with me, from that hungry young man stepping off the boat with nothing, to these last old years watching the lighthouses blink along the reef and the cigar factories go dark, I think you'd understand the one thing I most want to tell you. Money bought me a great deal on that island. A fine house, fine food, a fine life. But the sea and the storm and the fever and time itself were never for sale. And most days, out under that endless sky, knowing that was its own kind of wealth.